who are in the chapel, not exclusively, but mainly to you and those of us who are men. Much of what I say will be relevant for the ladies as well, but because I am talking on temptation, I confess to you a real area and level of ignorance and how to apply it to the ladies. I am very well acquainted with the battle for men, since I'm in that category, but time would not permit me to broaden the target to include the women as well. So however it speaks to you ladies, wonderful. I'm grateful that you are open and willing to apply it. I also believe it is appropriate that I address men mainly because we are more often than not the aggressor and sometimes tragically the predators. And that would include men in ministry. I realized when I looked at my calendar that this would be my final time to speak for this school year, and I had another direction in mind as I was going to move toward the importance of, especially you who are leaving the school to enter ministry as vocational Christian service in your life, to begin strong and to stay consistent and faithful and to end well. However, my direction changed when I received a letter which deserves a little bit of preparation so you can appreciate the content of the letter. I've known the man who wrote this letter since he was a young teenager. He's now in his 40s. I watched him grow up in our church. I found great delight in him and his family. He was often in our home, became our oldest son's good friend. And he as well built a relationship with another young man about their ages, and they were almost inseparable through high school and then into and through college. One of the joys of remaining in the same church over a period of years is that you have the chance to go the full cycle. You dedicate them as little babies, and you are a part of the delight of their early years in the elementary school, and then you teach them, as in our case, in our doctrine class, which we taught them before they entered high school, and you are with them through high school and all of those trials and struggles, and then you're there for them as they marry and as they have their children, which was true of this young man who is now engaged in ministry. He sat where you sit. He attended 4 years at Dallas Seminary, did very well. And by that, I don't necessarily mean academically. He did very well with his life. And he, with his inseparable friend, I think they were probably had most every lunch together. They found, separate from one another, lovely young women with whom they fell in love, and I married both of them at separate times. So our roots go very deep. So when I get a note from him or a letter, everything stops as I read what he has to say. Here are a few excerpts. Your comments on faithfulness and staying at it touched on a tender wound for me. I know you have experienced the heartache of close friends succumbing to moral compromise. Such has been my experience with my best friend since junior high days in Fullerton. He and his wife were struggling with personal intimacy issues in their marriage, and he has had an affair with his church secretary. He has since divorced his wife. She wanted to save their marriage, but he has now married the secretary. He has lost the trust of many believers who look to him as a model of spiritual maturity, the respect of his ministry peers, the loving esteem of his adult children. His ministry credentials removed from him where he has been serving, and so much more, he adds. My wife and I cannot believe what has unfolded in their lives. The two of them would have been the last couple. How often I read those words. The two of them would have been the last couple we could have imagined in this scenario. It has moved us to humble praise for God's grace in our lives and a holy assessment of our marriage to ensure that we bring no shame to the name we want to honor. He adds, I read with fresh sensitivity early this morning Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 9:27. I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. I would love to end this semester message of my time with you on a real high note, and perhaps we can look at it like that. If you will simply promise yourself you'll never forget what I have to say. For however long you live, and without question, you will certainly outlive me and most of us on the platform. And you will carry on. But you must understand that the people with whom I spend much of my time professionally are people who have been through this school. These are the men and women that who have paths that cross with mine often. And therefore, I follow their ministries with an enormous interest and devotion and care and love and affection. This breaks my heart. I couldn't finish reading it the first time I read it. I went downstairs to read it to Cynthia, and I couldn't finish again. Something happened between then and now. Maybe something happened before that I knew nothing about. Obviously it did, or I certainly would have addressed it, since we were often together. And I tend not to hold back when I'm really working closely with other men. And so today I am not going to hold back. I'm going to speak forthrightly. I probably won't need to raise my voice at all, because I think you will listen. Because I think you are also haunted by the same verse that haunts me. Let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. You will never outgrow lust. You will never come to the place where the opposite sex doesn't look attractive to you, even those you don't even know. It's sort of like what Patrick Morley writes in his book, The Man in the Mirror. The three of us were eating deli sandwiches at a street-side table on the picturesque main street of town. As we were about to leave, a very lovely woman passed by us on the sidewalk. She was beautiful, fresh, sophisticated. She seemed a perfect match for the day. It was a beautiful spring day. Many heads turned as she walked by, including the two men I was with. I watched their eyes follow her, and I could tell they had mentally undressed her in the secrecy of their private thought world. Not a word was spoken, and we headed back to the office. I found myself on the horns of a dilemma. I brooded with indignation over the obvious lust of these two, but at the same time, I was keenly aware that the only difference between us was that I had more carefully controlled my eye movement. Because Christians are expected not to lust over women. He's writing to men, so when he says Christian, he means Christian men. I carefully concealed my thoughts, yet I knew pretending not to notice was counterfeit. I knew I was leading a secret thought life different from the image I projected. I didn't like the pressure of leading those two lives, but I was embarrassed about it. I thought it was exclusively my problem. It never occurred to me that other Christian men might struggle with the same problem. Are you living a secret thought life significantly different from the you known by others? Would you be embarrassed if your friends and associates knew what went on inside your mind? If your thoughts were audible, would your wife want a divorce? Each of us leads a secret thought life, an invisible life, known only to us, not known to anyone else. The secret life is usually very different from the visible you. The you that is known by others, yet it's the real you. It's the you known by God. For some of us, our secret thought life consists of a dream world of fantasies which concoct intricate plans that would make us famous or powerful or wealthy. Others of us fabricate chance meetings with beautiful women who seduce us. We each invent a secret image of how we wish we were, which we would be embarrassed for others to know. I have my Bible open to Genesis 39. And as you turn to that chapter, it will be a chapter on sexual temptation. Interestingly, in this case, the woman is the seducer. She is the seductress. That's rare, but that does occur. And maybe some of you ladies have a struggle in this area. I have no way of knowing. I don't understand your world. I do understand the world of men very well, which is why I direct my words mainly today to men. This is a remarkable story of a man who did not fall, who did not even yield. It's a remarkable account of a man who had such possession of his thought life that he wouldn't allow his imagination to run wild, even though he was a single adult, probably by now in his 20s, maybe late 20s. He has been sold into slavery. He has learned another culture and another language. He now a Jew living among Egyptians, and finds himself a trusted servant in the home of a man who was an official of the Egyptian government, a man named Potiphar. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Watch closely the setup. His master saw that the Lord was with him and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and he became his personal servant. He made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. What a magnificent trust. This Egyptian officer over time had watched, studied, listened to, seen the results of the work of this Hebrew servant, and little by little he released to him more and more responsibility and authority and privacy. It came about, verse 5, that from the time he made him overseer in his house over all that he owned, we read again, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge. And with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. That, men and women, is trust. That's what you earn over the years as a pastor. That is what you earn over the years as a faculty member of some school you may serve. That is the reward of our great God on the lives of those who are faithful, who do good work, who don't compromise, who tell the truth, who keep their word, who keep short accounts, who don't take advantage of people and don't exploit, who don't manipulate. Joseph was a trustworthy man, and Potiphar finally found himself completely comfortable leaving everything in Joseph's charge. Before I go one step further, I have to pause and say that in itself puts you in a very vulnerable position, because you still have your thought life. You still have a world that goes on in your brain and in your old nature that is vile. It is obscene, which, if the Spirit of God does not control it, waits for the moment to lurch into action. We had a man who was a very fine preacher and long-time servant of Christ, we thought, had been in several churches by the time he came to the one he was in when we invited him to be one of our conference speakers. And he brought 5 significant messages, interestingly, on accountability, only for us to find out a few months later that he had women on the string at every church he had served, until it finally came to light within months after he had been ministering to us at our conference. And he had lived a lie. Though at each church he had earned the trust of the people by his visible world. But he was a liar. He was an adulterer. He was an unfaithful man. You will be, perhaps by the grace of God, in a place that will ultimately be enviable. You will have the trust of your congregation. You will have the respect of your elders. You will have the reputation over the years. You will have your degrees, and you will be unquestioned, quite likely, in a setting that becomes a very, very dangerous place. F.B. Meyer, in his book on Joseph, writes, "We may expect temptation in days of prosperity and ease, rather than in those of privation and toil. Not where men frown, but where they smile, sweet, exquisite smiles of flattery. It is there, he repeats, that the temptress lies in wait. If you go armed anywhere, you must above all go armed there." I'm reminded of Thomas Carlyle's words, the Scottish essayist. Adversity is hard on a man, but for every 100 who can handle adversity, one can handle prosperity. You are in a dangerous place when all speak well of you, because then it's you and God, and hopefully a circle of individuals with whom you have made yourself accountable, so that your private world doesn't become a scandal and a shame. So Joseph, we read, is left with everything. The end of verse 6 says something that appears only 2 other places in all the scriptures. Interestingly, this is said only of David in 1 Samuel 16 and only of Absalom in 2 Samuel 14. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. The NIV says he was well built and handsome. Nothing wrong with either one. It isn't fair, but there's nothing wrong with either one of them. Nothing wrong with that. We used to have a superintendent in our evangelical free church group out in the West Coast, a wonderful friend named Wally Norling, who referred to one of our younger preachers as being cursed with good looks. Isn't that a good way to put it? If you're cursed with good looks, you got even more working against you. I've never had that problem, thank God. I got a bunch of others, but that was not one of them. But I know some dear guys that are in ministry that women's eyes roll when he's around. He's just handsome. Joseph was like that. Good shape, chiseled face, strong, young, available. Mrs. Potiphar noticed it. It came about after these events. Isn't the Bible eloquent? How full of meaning are those 3 words, after these events. Year after year after year after year after year. Faithful, faithful, faithful. Trustworthy, trustworthy, trust. Never once taking as much as a paper clip from Potiphar's house. After these things, the enemy of our souls has perfect timing. Perfect. After these events, his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." That's what I call the direct approach. Rarely happens, but sometime it will. I'm drawn not so much to her words, I'm drawn to the word desire. She lusted after Joseph. Dietrich Bonhoeffer has done his best work in a very small book that we could almost call a booklet. It's entitled Temptation. Listen to Bonhoeffer. In our members, there is a slumbering inclination toward desire, which is both sudden and fierce. With irresistible power, desire seizes mastery over the flesh. All at once, a secret smoldering fire is kindled. The flesh burns and is in flames. It makes no difference whether it is sexual desire or ambition or vanity or desire for revenge or love of fame and power or greed for money. Joy in God is extinguished. as we seek all our joy in the creature. At this moment, God is quite unreal to us. And only desire for the creature is real. Satan, I love this line, Satan does not here fill us with hatred of God, but with forgetfulness of God. We'll just put God aside for now. Satan does not here fill us with hatred of God, but with forgetfulness of God. The lust thus aroused envelops the mind and will in deepest darkness. The powers of clear discrimination and of decision are taken from us. It is here that everything within me rises up against the word of God. That's it. He nails it. In vulnerable moments, I don't hate God. I just kind of get him out of the focus of my mind. Joseph never did that. Lie with me, she says. But he refused. Good for him. He said to his master's wife, notice how that's written. He says to his master's wife, of course. Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you were his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? Clarence McCartney writes, this was no ordinary temptation. Joseph was not a stone, a mummy, but a red-blooded young man in his 20s. It was not one temptation on one day, but a repeated temptation. An old story tells how when Joseph began to talk about God, the temptress flung her skirt over the marble bust of the God that stood in the chamber and said, now the gods will not see. But Joseph answered, my God sees. Reminds me of what the psalmist writes in 139, verse 3. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and you are intimately acquainted with all my ways. He knows every minute you spend on the internet. He sees everything you look at. He sees every stolen moment. He sees it all. I forget who said it. I wish I had been the originator, that a secret sin on earth is open scandal in heaven. There's no sin here. There's no sin in the temptation. Sin is in the yielding. So he says no. Now, the great hope is that does it. She's out of the way. Nope. Verse 10, it came about as she spoke to Joseph day after day, that he did not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Day after day after day after day. Remarkable, remarkable relationship with God. I almost said remarkable man, but he's just a man like you or me. The difference is he had cultivated the kind of relationship with his God that would not permit this. Just would not permit it. One day she finally decides enough's enough. It happened on that day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. So they're all alone. I'm sure she made sure there was no one else around, perhaps locked the doors. She caught him by his garments, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. Interestingly, so often in the New Testament, when you come to passages dealing with sexual lust, the answer is to run. That's a wonderful response. You can't lust and run fast at the same time. And he took off running, left part of his garments there. And when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us." There's anti-Semitism in her words. This Jew. He came in to me to lie with me and I screamed, so she's claiming rape. Interestingly, if he had meant anything to her, she wouldn't have turned on him. He meant nothing to her. Lust is never a fulfillment of love. It's usually an act of anger and often emotional assault. It goes back to deep, deep, unresolved situations that have not been rooted out, discovered. Came about when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, that he left his garment beside me and fled. She left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to make sport of me. It happened as I raised my voice and screamed that he fled." When the master heard of it, his anger burned, and verse 20, he put him in jail. Verse 21, but the Lord was with him. How do I apply all of this? Let me do it quickly. 4 thoughts came to my mind early this morning. All of them are you must not. First of all, you must not be weakened by your situation. You must not be weakened by your situation. Economically, Joseph was secure, respected, and trusted. Personally, he was handsome, desired. Miscellaneous other things, they were alone, had an excellent track record. He was invited. He was unmarried. It's her idea. Your flesh invariably will remind you of those unique situational circumstances, and you'll fall. If you don't, strengthen your life in the midst of whatever situation. So you must not be weakened by your situation. Secondly, you must not be deceived in the persuasion. It was a bold, flattering, calculated, direct, and quite frankly, extremely desirable. In what I read, I find that the ancient Egyptian women were fabulously beautiful. It's quite possible that cosmetics began there, and they knew how to make themselves even more attractive. He could have thought, her husband doesn't meet her needs like I could. By doing this, you'll prove that you really care for me. Who will ever find out we're completely safe? Look, I'm so terribly alone and lonely, and God will understand. Just this once, never, ever, ever again. Those are the words of temptation. You must not be deceived in the persuasion. Here's the third, and perhaps I mean this one most firmly of all 4. You must not be gentle with your emotions. We read in verse 8, he refused. We read in verse 9, it is a great evil. Those are his words. Sin against God. Those are his words to her. He did not listen to her and would not be with her, verse 10. Verse 12, he left and fled and went into the street. Those are all strong, not gentle, but strong reactions to the emotions within him. The late Dag Hammarskjöld once wrote, "You cannot play with the animal in you without becoming wholly animal. Play with falsehood without forfeiting your right to truth. Play with cruelty without losing your sensitivity of mind. He who wants to keep his garden tidy doesn't reserve a plot for weeds." You must not be weakened by your situation. You must not be deceived in the persuasion. You must not be gentle with your emotions. By the way, if necessary, be rude. Just be rude. That has a way of turning the other person off. Number 4, you must not be confused with the immediate results. Day after day, he's tempted. Advances become more forceful, not less. False accusation followed his obedience. He was later then demoted, misunderstood, and dumped in jail. I would add also, you must never forget the ramifications. In his fine book, Christ in Isaiah, F. B. Meyer writes this: "This is the bitterest of all, to know that suffering need not have been. That it has resulted from indiscretion and inconsistency. That it's the harvest of one's own sowing. That the vulture which feeds on the vitals is a nestling of one's own rearing. Ah, me, this is pain." I woke up this morning thinking about my friend's friend in bed with another woman. I thought about how he must feel, alienated now from friends and, worst of all, his own children. I thought about everything he had planned for and trained for was now worthless. So what does he do now? Is she worth that? If you could possibly project yourself beyond the moment of sheer ecstasy for just a few seconds of ecstasy and think about a lifetime of shame, it'll help you. It'll help. Stay pure. Stay pure. Stay pure. Lord, we sit in this room and all of it makes such sense, and we would all acknowledge that everything we've heard ties in with what you have taught and what we believe. And in this room, we're all in the majority and everybody's lockstep with one another, going to stay pure, going to stay pure. But in a few years, we'll all be separated and more of our hours will be spent away from anybody in this room. And that's when the test will come. May we never forget the marvelous model of Joseph and the way you strengthened him in this hour, those days, and how you took him even through the jail experience to promote him to a position he would never otherwise have had. I pray for these younger men and women who have their lives before them, that they may be for you throughout their lives testimonies of the holiness of God. I ask that for faculty and student alike, for preacher and missionary alike, for counselor and staff member and musician alike, for authors, songwriters, for those who hold responsible positions in the future, leading ministries and serving the people. May we be models of purity. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. In the name of the Savior. Everybody said. Seemed like I was just here, doesn't it? Just close together. It's always great to be with you, and I thank you for coming. I know it's voluntary, and I'm always surprised when people listen as I speak, and I thank you for your courtesy in doing that. This will be one of those messages you won't ever forget. It's on a subject I never heard addressed while I was a student here, because in those days you didn't talk about these things. Isn't that interesting? It's not that they didn't go on, it's that no one felt it was dignified or appropriate to address these things, and so I didn't hear one message on it. There were occasions I would hear a war story or two, but I never heard the subject really developed from the scriptures. And so I want to do that today because it is an area that will ruin your time at seminary, which is my overarching theme of my time with you. Strange subject to have as a theme, but that also was never addressed. When I graduated, I don't believe I once heard anyone talk about a failing in ministry or suffering real defeat, disappointment. When I first brought a talk on the subject, this theme, I talked about worry. Some of you may remember, and how it can steal our joy and our peace if it comes in and haunts us. So I warned all of us about worry and the impact it can have on us. And then the next time we were together, I talked about attitude and how a bad attitude can not only ruin relationships, including those at home, as well as those in the classroom and even in our future ministry, regardless of where God may take us. It's really hard to get beyond an attitude with individuals if they're determined not to change in that area. So I've warned us about that. Last time I talked about a sinister sin, which is a cynicism itself, which can easily grow in a place where there are academic achievements and the desire to do our very best, and in the process we can turn sour on the sensitive subjects of the Spirit. And so we talked about the value of guarding against that. Today I want to talk about the secret sins of our lives that have to do with the realm of lust and sex. I want to hit it head on. I want to go directly into it. I don't want to dance around it. I want to talk straight with all of you. And I have in mind both men and women, though it seems to be a greater battle among those of us who are men. And as I think back over the number of times I've had the sad experience of being a part of a gathering where an individual needed to be confronted, and it led to the downfall of that individual's ministry. They've always been men. But I believe women, just as men, can be guilty of lust and can be a part of affairs that occur in our lives. We had a seasoned pastor speak to us in a gathering. We had brought our pastors together in a former church, and we had asked him to speak on whatever he thought would be helpful for us to hear. And he began by making a statement I'll never forget. He said there are 4 areas, all of them start with the letter S, that become most often the downfall of people in ministry. The first would be silver, which has to do with the whole area of money and greed, how that can turn our heads in the wrong direction. The next is self, where life can revolve around us. In ministry, you're often given a place of authority, and you are respected unless you have conducted yourself in a way that has led people to disrespect. But most often, they respect you, and in the respect, you can let that go to your head, and before long, it's all about you. Self can be a real battle. Sloth was the third. In ministry, you are trusted with privacy. You are given the privilege of pretty much shaping your own hours. I don't know of any minister that punches a clock when you come to work and then you leave and people check on your time. And so it can easily become a battle with sloth. Whatever may be your interest, aside from the work of ministry, can become consuming. It can be a hobby. It can be a sport. It can be just plain laziness. And then, of course, the fourth would be sex. And then he went into that subject further and reminded us of the importance of purity. As I talk about this today, I don't want you to think I'm talking to someone else. Even though it may not be for you a real battle. I'd be surprised among the men if it is not one of your major battles. It's everywhere. And it shows up everywhere. Back when I was riding Harleys with my younger son, he and I wanted to go to Tioga, which is a little town north of here. They got great barbecue, and it's a nice ride. Back roads are always the best roads on a bike. And I said to him, let's go to Tioga and enjoy some of that great barbecue. The place has burned down since then. But anyway, back then it was a great spot. And he said, great, I've never heard of it. I don't know how to get there. So I pulled up Google Maps, and when I pulled up Tioga, there was a huge statement, sex, that appeared on. Now, I've been to Tioga now, and it has nothing to do with sex, I can assure you. It's just a little dumpy town to the north that got great barbecue, but somebody knew that enough people were interested in that town and perhaps that place to place that into the computer in such a way that when you pull that up, that appeared. It's an example. And the internet, of course, is filled with it. It's a downfall for some of you sitting here today, I would imagine. I'd be surprised if there were not more than a few of you that struggle with sex on the internet. Whether it's a chat room or some site you have secretly found and you turn to. Years ago, you had to go to a dirty movie, or you had to sneak a peek at a magazine stand to look at it. Now you can see it in the privacy of your own home. lock your door, pull your blinds, and you're all alone with it. And I need to tell you, I've never been more serious. It'll ruin you. It'll win. It'll conquer you. If you don't determine, I suggest, in your years at this school, to come to terms with it and to deal with it severely in your life, it'll conquer you. It'll take over. You may not publicly fall, but you will lose the mental battle. It'll drain you. And as a result, it will cut in on your stride as a man or woman of God. David's fall, according to the record in 2 Samuel 11, where I want us to go, did not begin on his roof when he took a walk and he saw Bathsheba bathing. David's problem began earlier. David obviously is a man of enormous passion. No one could write like David can write, and that kind of passion works its way out in a number of different ways. And often the very gifted have the greatest battles in this area, and most of you are very gifted people. And you who have great imaginations will battle in this area as well. David was really something else. I would of all the biblical characters, I believe I would most love to have had time with David. I admire him for his accomplishments and for his tenderness, his love for God, his heart that just beat after God. I, of course, have consumed his songs, his psalms, and they are music to my soul. Anyone can write like that, and often with the honesty with which he wrote, has my respect. David was a faithful man. He kept his father's sheep, and even after killing the giant, he doesn't, run down to Macy's and try on crowns, thinking the kingdom is mine. Certainly after Samuel anointed him, he went right back to the sheep. I love that. David was not important to David. Even though he became the greatest of Israel's kings, the flag flew over the nation with greater pride than ever before when David became king. One man writes rather cleverly, there was not only a chicken in every pot, but under David's rule there were grapes on every vine. The prosperity was magnificent. The enemy feared Israel under David's rule, man of war, courageous, also loved many women. And against the teachings of the law, he took to his harem, if I count correctly, at least 17 wives, and along with that, many concubines. I'm confident his libido was intense, and though that's true, many women did not satisfy the man. The old feeling is that if you have enough women, you will be satisfied. There aren't enough women, because with sex there is always the thought of the unknown, and there is pleasure in the act of intercourse, regardless of who it is with, especially if your conscience is such that you can tolerate it outside of your marriage. Many people can. was at a hotel with Cynthia, staying there for a conference, and interesting, there's a little sign, a little small, very well-written, beautiful calligraphy, "Have your next affair with us," right there on the table. It's everywhere. And David knew better, of course. We'll talk about that. But I want to build into it carefully, lest you think he just suddenly fell. No tree suddenly rots and collapses. No church suddenly splits. No marriage suddenly fractures. No life suddenly falls. It's a process. You're in the process. I'm in the process. It's always going on. And the enemy is so patient and brilliant. He'll take years and just drop a little here and there to keep you interested, keep you curious. David served Saul, as all of you know from your study of the scriptures, and loved Saul's son like a brother, and he and Jonathan were just tight. And then at that battle on Mount Gilboa, they died. And David grieved the loss. Though Saul had haunted him and hunted him for years, David held him in respect. Another thing I admire. And so when he comes, if you have your Bible, 2 Samuel chapter 1, you find David now in grief. And as he was wont to do, he wrote a song. And it appears beautifully here in our Bibles. And the theme of the song, Aki naflu giborim bitok hamil kama. How the mighty are fallen in a day of battle. How the mighty are fallen. How the mighty are fallen. It says it 3 times in this one song. You see it in verse 19. You see it in verse 25. You see it in verse 27. How the mighty are fallen. And his heart breaks for the fact that he'll never again speak to Jonathan on earth. He'll never again know the joy of seeing tall, handsome Saul, his king. Never again. As best I can figure, David is about 30 at this time. And the mighty have fallen. And he writes about it. He has no idea what in the next 20 years would happen. But the success of David's life is like a rooftop on the rise. Never once a defeat in battle. Think of that. Never once did Israel lose a battle under David's rule. He expanded the borders from 6,000 to 60,000 square miles. And as I mentioned, the prosperity and the pride of the country, the patriotism must have been magnificent. He built a beautiful home, his own palace for him and his many wives. And he kept adding to his harem, and it kept weakening his soul. Life went on, but who was going to confront David the fact that he had broken with what Moses had written? Who confronts a king like this? Which is part of the issue you will face as a leader. Especially if God blesses your life with success, as we measure success. and your ministry grows and your church becomes larger, or your outreach and influence becomes greater, and your teaching skills get even better, and your popularity grows, and you're a word on others' lips, and you're a household name in the country where you serve. Right now you sit here as a student, you think that's not going to, you have no idea what's going to be your future. You have no idea. That's why the decisions you make now and the habits you form now must be carefully managed, because you will carry them out in the days ahead like you can't believe. And if you have a wandering eye now, it will only intensify as you get older. And you never outgrow it. You never get too old for it. I remember sitting at a Navigator conference when I was at Glen Eyrie. And Lauren Sanney, the president at the time, now gone, Lauren was interviewing an 86, 87-year-old missionary. And he said to him, "Tell me, brother so-and-so, when was it you gained victory over lust?" And the old guy said, "Well, Lauren, it hadn't happened yet." 86, 87-year-old guy still fighting lust. Of course. It's a drive that is if it's not guarded, if it's not monitored, is uncontrollable. And in the most unbelievable times of your life, you can fall. I've had men minister in conferences where we were as a church, and while ministering behind the scenes, they are carrying on an affair with another woman, not their wife. One of them even chose as his subject for the conference moral purity, while he is having an affair that later came out and pretty much finished him. Do not tell me that cannot happen. It's unbelievable. And his messages were spot on. I remember taking notes and talking with Cynthia about it after he would bring it, and I would say, "Did you get that? Listen to it." And I went, great insight. How the mighty are fallen. Don't forget those words. David did. So when you move from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 11, you're moving through one victory after another, after another, after another. And by the way, right in the back margin of your mind, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Let her who thinks she stands take heed lest she fall. Every one of you can fall just like this man of God fell. And today it seems the farthest thing from your mind. I'm glad it does, but that's an unrealistic thought. Now, so much for my introduction. I wanted to get into it carefully and slowly, and I hope I've done that. We're not in a hurry, are we? They gave me a little extra time. I appreciate that, Patrick. Okay. 2 Samuel 5:13, I find, meanwhile, David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron. He took more wives. And if that wasn't enough, he took more concubines. Polygamy weakened him. His opinion poll was at an all-time high. Popularity rate was off the chart. Maximum power and prosperity. Luxurious lifestyle was his. The respect of his army. Joab, that cruel, tough to the bone soldier, was right there with him. David was his kind of guy. The palace and all of its conveniences, he had it made. And then that eventful evening arrived. It happened in the spring at the time when kings go out to battle. 2 Samuel 11:1a. He's a king, but he doesn't go out to battle. Why? We're not told. Probably thought Joab could handle this one. Who are the Amalekites? I mean, half my army could whip them. They can take care of that. He should have been out there. By the way, lust doesn't grow when you're busily engaged in your work. Another one that works is running. Flee youthful lusts. That works. You cannot lust and run at the same time. I remember being on Okinawa and they brought in 5,000 prostitutes to service the Marines as if we're animals. Well, many were. And I said to my mentor, how do I conquer the issue of temptation? Because when I get off the jitney and I've got to get up to your place for our Bible study, I got to walk by all these whorehouses where these beautiful women are out there waving and whistling and calling you in. And he said, run. You know what? I started doing that. And you know what? I didn't lust for any of them. My thought was, get out of the way. I'm trying to get up to Newkirk's place. But he lounges around. That's what you're going to do in some part of the next several weeks. Christmas comes. You have a little more time on your hands. I know you've got a lot of work to do, but you're gonna hang out a little, and that's when I get nervous for you, because bad things happen when you hang out, and when you don't keep yourself occupied. I know what I'm talking about. Thankfully, I've never fallen, but there have been close calls. I was in Canada at a conference that lasted over the weekend, and I really was looking forward to watching a little football on TV, but they have hockey up there. And I know if you're Canadian, so don't write me. I know it's great. It's a goon sport, okay? I mean, these guys knock their teeth out, and the more blood, the better. And somebody said they watched a hockey game that was boring until a fight broke out, and then all of a sudden it got good. So I was looking for a football magazine. There wasn't one, and I decided I'll go back to the room, get ready for the talk tomorrow. It was a Saturday, and I punched the elevator button, and two ladies got on with me. The door closed behind us, and I pushed floor 6, as I recall, and I looked at them. They didn't push a button, and I said, floor, and they said 6 would be nice. Well, I felt a little like Tom Cruise all of a sudden. Or maybe Robert Redford, I'm a little closer to that age. And then, I'm honest, the shade drew, and my mother's voice revisited me as I read, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." No one knew me where I was. I was thousands of miles from home. Could have invited the women in. And then when I finished, I was kind of staring, reading the verse in my mind, and they're looking at me like, so when the shade went up, I said, no thanks, I've got more than I can keep up with at home. And I stepped out and the door closed, and they stayed on. And I leaned up against those marble walls, and I thank God for the memorized scripture. Amen. That saved me from a fall. Amen. You would have never known it, but I would have lived with it. And I could have never talked on this. Or if I did, I'd have to fake it. And so David is lounging around the house. And he sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. David stayed at Jerusalem. He's alone. He has time on his hands. And evening came. By the way, I did a little homework on evenings. Listen to David's words. Psalm 55, evening, morning, and noon, I will pray and cry aloud, and he will hear my voice. He will redeem my soul in peace from the battle which is against me. Psalm 55, 17 and 18. He wrote that. But he didn't do that this evening. Here's another one. Psalm 141, 2 through 4. May my prayer be counted as incense before you, the lifting up of my hands as the evening offering. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Do not incline my heart to any evil thing. Or as one paraphrase puts it, the Message, do not let me so much as dream of evil or thoughtlessly fall. Isn't that good? He forgot that this evening. Or maybe he wrote that after this evening. Here is our respected leader, the king like no other king, with an incredible record of faithfulness and refusal to retaliate against Saul, and courage in battle, took on the giant, and now became king. Best I can figure, he's about 50, maybe 55. I have an older son who's 55. And our kids go all the way down to 46. And he's Kurt's age, probably. I looked at Kurt the other day when we were together, and I thought about this. And I'm so grateful that Kurt's been faithful to Debbie all these years. They have 3 kids. Oldest is 36, and they've got those grandkids now have kids. So it looks like recess let out when we get all our family together. We got 4 kids, and we got 10 grandkids, and we got 6 great-grandkids. And they range in age all over. So when I travel, I carry a picture of my family, and I put it on the table where I eat. And if Cynthia can't go with me, I usually take someone else. And if no one else can, the picture is there. I even went on a cruise. Cynthia was not able, getting over her back surgery, spine surgery, so I took a picture of her and showed everybody. This is who I'm with at this cruise. And you sleep with a picture, boy, it's ugly. I'll tell you, the corner of that thing digs into you. But there she was. I saw her every morning, and I looked at her at every meal. You don't lust easily when you got your wife looking you right in the eye, or your kids, or your grandkids, loving you, believing in you, counting on you. like Noah. Noah's 22 today, second day of boot camp in the Marine Corps. Yeah, 22. He put in for MARSOC, which is the Navy's answer to the SEALs. That's what the Marines are in MARSOC. Noah wants to do the toughest thing. I remember when he was growing up, when he wrote this little thing I'm going to show you. And all the grandkids call me Bubba. All the great grandkids call me Great Bubba. So, Bubba and Great Bubba. So Noah is about, I think 6, 7 when he wrote this, when he drew this. And Noah put a little heart there, if you probably can't see it, but it says, I heart Bubba. He loves Bubba. Remember when Noah was about 12, he sat in front of me at my desk. I have a little small statue of the Marines that were lifting the flag on Iwo Jima. And he said, I want to be a Marine. I said, do you? He said, yeah. I said, why? He said, well, I want to be a sniper. I want to kill people. I said, no. Sit down, Noah, sit down. So Noah sat down and he said, well, that's what you were and that's what you did. No. I said, I was in the Corps, but I didn't kill people. Wanted to, but I didn't kill people. And he left. I found that on my desk this morning here at the seminary. I got a grandson that loves me. And I hope he does. He's now in boot camp, so I should pray for Noah. He's going through it right now. What am I saying? I am saying David forgot all of that. Every bit of it. Every child. Every wife. Worse, his God. Listen to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote about temptation. In our members, there is a slumbering inclination toward desire, which is both sudden and fierce. With irresistible power, desire seizes mastery over the flesh all at once. A secret smoldering fire is kindled. The flesh burns and is in flames. It makes no difference whether it is sexual desire or ambition or vanity or desire for revenge or love of fame or power or greed for money. Joy in God is extinguished from us as we seek all our joy in the creature. At this moment, this is so insightful. At this moment, God is quite unreal to us, and only desire for the creature is real. Satan does not here fill us with hatred of God, but with forgetfulness of God. Isn't that great? David didn't hate God. He just forgot him. The lust thus aroused envelops the mind and will in deepest darkness. The powers of clear discrimination and decision are taken from us. It is here that everything within me rises up against the word of God. That is profound. That is the height of lust. That makes even a monarch like David stare at a woman taking a shower in her backyard. When evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof, he saw a woman. You know the first recorded words from the mouth of Samson? I saw a woman. I call Samson a he-man with a she weakness. At this moment, that's David. He doesn't think about battles won. He doesn't think about the faithfulness of his God. He doesn't think about the trust of his children, his Noah. He's thinking about one thing. Every man in this room knows exactly what he's thinking. He doesn't have to undress her. She's all ready. In fact, look, he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. Trust me, when the scripture says very beautiful, she is gorgeous. And he stares. And he wants her. He's got all these women, all these concubines. He wants her. Because he's never had her. So David went and inquired about the woman. By the way, she was his neighbor, and he'd never met her. Busy about the king's business, I can understand that. And one who he talked to said to him, listen to this answer. Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? That's unusual. When genealogies are given in the scriptures, usually it's the father named and the grandfather, sometimes the great-grandfather. Rarely is the mate mentioned. That servant also is looking. And he knows David, what's in his mind. Every man knows other men in this way. And he says, she's married, David. She's a married woman. And not just married, she's married to one of your mighty men, Uriah the Hittite. Someday, Dr. Bailey, you need to have Reg Grant. Is Reg here? Reg was on one of our cruises, and he does Uriah. That is a knockout presentation. Because he does it all from the perspective of Uriah, who trusts his king, who can't bear the thought of even touching his wife while his men are in battle, who doesn't cooperate with the king, even when the king gets him drunk. And then finally he gets his death warrant handed to him, folded up, put in a pouch, and as Reg puts this, he pats the pouch. He says, I've had the message from the king to go to my commander Joab, and I will take that message. And you want to go, no, don't. It's so real. I just want you to have Reg do that sometime. Line him up to do Uriah. Oh, I sound like the hot shot here. Please, if you don't mind, line him up. Anyway, it's really worth it. Okay. David sent and inquired. They said she's Uriah's wife. And David sent messenger. Yeah, that didn't stop him. To know that she's somebody else's wife, it doesn't stop you when you're full of lust. Nothing stops you. I'm telling you, men, I can only speak to you. I don't know how it works with a woman, but I'll tell you, you go blind. He didn't even know her name. He was already lusting. And he sent messengers, and he took her, and when she came in, he lay with her. When she had purified herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. Probably left that night. Done. Not quite. Stolen waters are sweet, and I'm sure on that bed, it was ecstasy for just a few moments. Worth that? Worth all of that? Never. F.B. Meyer writes, this is the bitterest of all, to know that suffering need not have been. That it has resulted from indiscretion and inconsistency and neglect. That it is the harvest of one's own sowing. That the vulture which feeds on the vitals is the nestling of one's own rearing. Ah, me, this is pain. You hear that? How the mighty have fallen. 20 years' time, he forgot his own line. Because sex is that powerful. She returned to her own house. I could take time here to speak to you women, and probably should say a few words. Be really careful, ladies. We are very vulnerable men. Dress yourself very carefully. Conduct yourself without flirting. Don't go there. Save it all for your husband. And that's all I need to say. You are lovely ladies, and you have a future that's beautiful. And I can't help but mention Bathsheba was not raped. She came. I know people obeyed the king. She didn't have to say yes to this. There is no fight. She was lonely, and she missed her husband. David was available. That's kind of the way it works, because both forget about God. And the woman conceived and sent and told David and said, I am pregnant. Now, I'm not through until I mention 4 things that I want you to remember. No one ever said this to me when I was a seminary student. Thankfully, by God's grace and the love of a magnificent wife and good training by great parents, the grace of God that preserved me all the way through my hitch in the Marine Corps, all the way through these years in ministry, by the grace of God, Noah won't have to say, I no longer respect Bubba. By the grace of God. To keep from thinking we're safe, let me give you 2 comments. First, acknowledge your weakness. Acknowledge your weakness. And second, guard your leisure. You will be trusted with privacy. Be careful about that. Acknowledge your weakness. Guard your leisure. And now, to keep from falling, 2 final things. Number 1, remain accountable. I carry accountability questions that we ask in our accountability group periodically to the other men in the group. Have you been with a woman anywhere this past week that might be seen as compromising? Answer that question. Have you exposed yourself to any sexually explicit material? Answer that question. Surf the net? Secretly developing this? You hide explicit material. I don't know how many men have told me they started in pornography because of the stack of pornography magazines that their dad had. And that started them on the journey. Have you spent adequate time in your own personal study of the Scriptures and prayer? Have you given priority time to your family? The last question is the killer. Have you just lied to me? Called being accountable. You accountable to anybody? Willingly, deliberately, consistently? Remain accountable, and finally, rehearse the consequences. Sitting in this room, we're all safe. Sitting in this room, the lights are on. Sitting in this room are people who know us. Sitting in this room, we are, for one of the few places in life, in the majority. We love Jesus. He is our master. He's our Redeemer. He's our Lord. Your battle doesn't come in this room. It comes in the darkness of your own mind and the privacy of your own life. I'll look over all these other things. I want to read you something. Consequences of a Moral Tumble. Randy Alcorn. Whenever I feel particularly vulnerable to sexual temptation, I find it helpful to review what effects my action could have. And he lists them. Listen to this list. Grieving the Lord who redeemed me, dragging his sacred name into the mud, following in the footsteps of these people whose immorality forfeited their ministries and caused me to shudder. List their names. Inflicting untold hurt on Nancy, my best friend and loyal wife. Losing Nancy's respect and trust. Hurting my beloved daughters, Karina and Angie. And when I read that, I read my children's names. Kurt and Carissa, Colleen and Chuck, who believe in me, who trust me. Destroying my example and credibility with my children and nullifying both present and future efforts to teach them to obey God. Why listen to a man who betrayed Mom and us? If my blindness should continue or my wife be unable to forgive, perhaps losing my wife and my children forever. Consequences continue. Losing self-respect, creating a form of guilt awfully hard to shake. Even though God would forgive me, would I ever forgive myself? Forming memories and flashbacks that could haunt me and future intimacy with my wife. Wasting years of ministry training and experience for a long time, maybe permanently. Forfeiting the effective years of witnessing to my father and reinforcing his distrust for ministers because of my fall. Undermining the faithful example and hard work of other Christians in our community. Bringing great pleasure to Satan, the enemy of God and all that is good. Heaping judgment and endless difficulty on the person with whom I committed adultery. Possibly bearing the physical consequences of such diseases as gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, herpes, and AIDS, perhaps infecting Nancy for the rest of her life. That's enough. This has been the autopsy of a moral fall. God tells us the truth. Don't you ever forget it.
Don't ever forget it. Don't ever forget this message. And may he keep you pure and faithful, whether married or single, younger or older, involved in ministry or some phase of ministry or some secular role. Whatever, may he keep you faithful. May your grandson always be able to leave you a note like this. Our Father, we confess to you that we are mere human beings. We are mere women and men. We are not super people. The same nature that beat in the heart of David beats in ours. And there it is every day to meet us, every morning, with fresh, lurid temptations. An enemy ready to pounce, patiently waiting for the moment when that man or that woman comes along and no one else will know at that time. Hold us close to yourself, dear Father. May we never, ever forget these words. How the mighty are fallen.